Good evening, everybody, and welcome to NLAP Accountability Project. Raven here reporting to you from St. John's, Newfoundland. Over the next hour, you're going to hear some very incredible information from our First Nations. Now, it's crazy. Greg James is a friend of ours, originally from Burgeo, who gave his life not only to the country as a veteran, but to committing himself to the benefits of finding out who we are, where we came from, what does it mean, how does it matter, what does the government say about our bloodlines. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring on Greg James and let's have a chat about accountability. Hi,
Hello, Dana.
Greg.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I'm so excited to get to talk to you. I just recently found out myself that I have my great grandmother is Inuit. So I have just fallen down the complete rabbit hole of trying to figure out who I am. And it blows my mind because I announced that I have some Inuit in me somewhere, which explains my little round face and my great tan that I get in the summer. And everybody's telling me I can't be Indigenous because I won't get my status. So it's really fascinating to have you on board because you have so much to share and you've spent more time learning about the culture of our province. And so tell us everything. Tell us
Yeah,
about you.
so it is a very interesting story. So my name is Greg James. I was born and raised in Burgeo, Newfoundland. I joined the military when I was 18 years old, and I served with the First Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, and but I always had a calling for the sea, so I remustered into the Royal Canadian Navy and served on various ships that until my injury. But I did get to complete 20 years in that.
Thank you
I
for your
moved home.
service. Thank you for your service.
My pleasure. Yeah, when I moved home, I'm a former chief at the Burgeo First Nation. I've been actively involved in the First Nations movement now for quite some time for recognition. But veterans here in Newfoundland, Indigenous veterans, have a very interesting story to tell. Not because it was approximately 13 years ago, Halibu First Nation was born out of the Federation of Newfoundland Indians. Um, but there was such an influx of applications, and now I carried status for 9 years at this time. But there was so much influx of applications. The government of Canada, along with the Federation of Newfoundland or Halibu First Nation, had to cook up a scheme to exclude and not to include.
Wait,
So,
wait, wait. You were a chief, right? Am I correct in
yeah,
saying that you were a functioning chief for the Halapu?
no, not a chief for Halibu, but chief of my band in Burgeo, because
Okay.
there's quite a large population in Burgeo of Indigenous people. So I went back and I formed a band because I didn't see that we were benefiting from what the larger centers were, like Corner Brook. We were being talked down upon, so I would have none of that. And I just want to get people together to talk about their stories, because we always knew who we were as a people, but there wasn't much mention about that. Um, so it was 9 years in. The government of Canada at the time, and which was the Liberal government, um, cooked up a scheme, a point system, where you had to prove, you had to get 13 points to prove that you were Indigenous. So, because I was serving abroad, one of those
What kind
things,
of point system was it that they were trying to implement? Like
well,
how do you prove you're Indigenous to the
so
government?
yeah, you had to have silly things like a picture in the newspaper taken with the chief, or pictures of berry picking, a way of life, and you also had to have a community connection with so many points. So you can get 12 points and have a receipt for when you were shopping in Corner Brook for a box of diapers, and that makes you Indigenous. Not right, not
What?
on your identity and everything like we had to prove previously. We had to have silly things whether you took part in that way of life. And I would utterly say that almost nearly every Newfoundlander took part in their hunting and fishing and things like
Mhm.
that. We're hunter and gatherers in Newfoundland. But for us, unfortunately, blueberries don't grow in the sand of Afghanistan, and
Mhm.
that's where things started to go wrong. Um, when you join the military, veterans are afforded certain rights along with the RCMP. Um, whereas we are giving what's called an ordinary residency because we're only on contract with the government of Canada until that time ends or whatever. We get to vote in our district, no matter where in the world that you serve, that we get to vote in our elections.
Mhm.
Plus, you are afforded hunting and fishing rights. So we get treated just like anyone else on the island when it comes to buying a fishing license or applying for a moose license, things like that. And we're also paid for our leave travel allowance. If your mother was or your parents were your next of kin, the military paid you to go to your hometown. Um, I've always kept that ordinary residency. So what they said at the time that I could not connect to a Mi'kmaq community. And I said, well, not many veterans really can because for one, it was only recently here that the RCMP have been allowed to return home to serve in their communities and to serve in their province. Now, one time they weren't allowed to do that. So how do you prove that you belong to a Mi'kmaq community when the government oppresses you where your community is? So
That doesn't make a lot of sense.
I'm getting everybody confused right now. So yeah, it does not make a lot of sense now, but there was an easy resolution to it. I figured anyway. So I thought that our ordinary residency wasn't being respected. 9 years ago, we had a meeting with Seamus O'Regan here in St. John's. Uh, Myself, Chief Brendan Mitchell, there was Moochie Bennett, our spiritual leader, and Ed Brake, a former highly decorated RCMP officer who was part of Mr. Trudeau's security detail when he was Prime Minister, Justin's father.
Mhm.
Uh, so our meeting went great. We showed him where things went wrong. Uh, Mr. O'Regan at the time that agreed. So we came out of that meeting feeling very positive that we were going to get reinstated. 9 years later, here we are being used as political pawns, I would say, for the greater of Halibu and every other politician who likes to take a picture or shake a hand with a veteran or kiss a baby. What I would say, that right?
Mhm.
So
Photo ops.
yeah, so yeah, it takes a lot of twists and turns in court. We know that the Federation Newfoundland Indians broke its bylaws in order to form Halibu First Nation. We know this, and I've had many meetings with many ministers over the period of time, with Minister of Veterans Affairs, uh, Minister with Goody Hutchings, with Miss Petipa herself. Um, Such an easy fix.
How was Goody's reaction when you spoke with her about it? Because she seems quite um,
Goody was
in
never with
line.
this file. She was never with this file. She couldn't care less. Honestly, in my heart of hearts right now, and that knowing what I know, that Goody Hutchins could not care less about an Indigenous person. Now,
That's
and actually, there's stories in there and that where she was threatened when she sold her cabin to John Risley in Labrador that she was fired upon by boarding her helicopter by Indigenous people. No,
wow.
that's fact. That's true. You can find it out there. But what happened? That the pilot closed the door, and she thought people were firing at her. Not right. So that carried throughout her career. I chased her down for 8 years. I was never granted a meeting with her. She always blew me off. She would during election time that says she would say that veterans need to get their status back, Indigenous veterans need to get their status back, but she never ever advocated on our behalf, and was left up to us. left up to me, really, not because we know that there was over 800 veterans, Halibu veterans, Newfoundland veterans that were affected by this. Now, Halibu First Nation held a plebiscite a couple of years ago when they reached an agreement with Canada and Halibu First Nations to have veterans reinstated. So we had to go with begging with cat in hand and say, please, would you take us back into the very band that we were kicked out of? So graciously, the 24,000 said yes, we'll take you veterans back, and so forth. Things were going really good right up until election time of a new chief and council, or new chief at the time, when Brendan Mitchell stepped down to be regional chief, and Miss Brake stood up and now is the chief of Halibu First Nation. I had meetings with him. I held meetings with him. That, in fact, that the last meeting I held with Jennifer Brake and with Charles Penner was on the Majestic Lawn in Corner Brook, because he would not invite me into the building. There was times that I've been told that I just don't belong. I attend every council meeting. I just hold a sign in the rain and the cold that says, status back or whatnot. Every councillor know why I'm there. I don't have to say anything. Our conversations are very cordial. It doesn't have to be about it. But when they sit down to that table, they know why Greg James is outside that building in the sleet and snow.
So you set up a band, right?
Yes.
And it's so these 800 veterans that are Halipu, that have they all had their status stripped?
They had their status stripped, even their wives and their children. So at the time, my son, well, he's 17 now. He was 9 at the time. He was practicing in his culture and everything, that doing what we do, learning and everything, that, and they just took him off the registry, took his status away, took my daughter's status away. Now, so my thing was that, and I'm the only one in my family, actually, among my brothers and sisters, who lost their status, and I want my children to be afforded the same rights as everyone else, as the chief's children. I have proven time and time again my lineage. I have proven, that I am Indigenous. I'm an Indigenous man. I'm a strong Indigenous man. When I was in the military, that wasn't brought out too lightly, and I've served on a committee, the Department of Aboriginal Advisory Group, that advises the government of policies in the military. But I'm not. I'm advising the government about its policies, and they're taking my status away.
So your brother, it still has his status.
Yes,
right?
my brothers and sisters still had their status, their children.
So what explanation do they give to you when they're like, well, he's Indigenous and you're not?
Yeah, it's kind of funny, Net, because during the last court proceeding, that we had a twin. One twin was granted status, and the other twin was not granted status. And she was being told that, although her sister was Indigenous, you're not. We have a police officer. We have a police officer who was serving in Iskazoni at the time, that they took his status away. He wanted to be involved helping the community as an Indigenous person, and they took his status away as well. The counts that go on and on and on. I've heard a lot of stories, and it's not about the veterans. That I want my recognition, of course. There is no benefit to me. There is no benefit financially, monetary, or anything like that, because I am covered and under my insurance and Veterans Affairs. My children are not being afforded to educational benefits, medical benefits, and everything, just like the other 24,000 people, members of Halibu is. We've been alienated. We've been threatened. We've been told we don't belong, but even by our own band or by our own chief, who says that
Do you
that
think there's
freedom
like
never lived.
do you think there's like financial or political motivation as to why this chief is making those decisions? Would that be something
Um,
that
I would just say this, Dana, that you don't bite the hand that feeds you. Okay,
mm,
and there's a lot of money that flows through Halibu First Nation. A lot of money. We're talking millions of dollars now. When I spoke to Goody Hutchings about the flow of money or whatever, and she would point out and say, "Well, it's Indigenous money." I said, "No, I don't agree with you in that, because it is taxpayers' money funding Indigenous programs, and what I have seen of that has been very, very loose, no accountability. So people are doing very well off taxpayers' money, and we're getting ourselves into trouble because we had people on mainland who saying that you're taking away from important programs. They call us pretend Indians, that right?
mm,
Um, but it's not true. We find we're just like any other First Nation across Turtle Island, that we have our own challenges, of course, our own unique identity, of course. Uh,
mm,
you know, these things about the culture, things like this. It's great to learn the language. It's great to learn the songs. It's great to learn to dance and to take part in these cultures now. But here in Newfoundland, we had a very distinct identity when it comes to culture and everything. There's a difference between culture and identity. What I think that, because our culture as Indigenous people here on Newfoundland, I followed in my father's footsteps that since I was a young boy, to learn how to fish, hunt, pick berries, forage. It was a part of our life here in Newfoundland.
mm-hmm,
Um, so everybody took part in it, not only Indigenous people, but it was a part of the survival and that. So yeah, but looking back today, where I started out to and where I'm to today in this, I have to learn. I heard a lot of heartbreaking stories. I had a call from a gentleman only weeks ago during the last council meeting, and he asked me if I would be attending that meeting. And I said, no, I don't. I'm not. I'll be in St. John's. He said, do you think that we'll get our status back? And I said, be quite honest. That I said, I don't. It doesn't look like it right now, because there is no political will. There is no political will on the part of the federal government, or there is no will on part of Halibu First Nations, other than to protect their own interests and everything that. And he said, I have stage 4 cancer, and I was hoping that my children would have their status before I passed, and that right. So we're talking weeks. We're talking about a man's wishes, that his
mm,
family was stripped of their status, and he thought it was important before he wanted to see his children as status people. Now, they take part in everything. It hasn't deferred them from learning the culture, learning our ways of life and everything that. But it's been a long road that I sat out and thought it was an easy fix. But what I do not like about all this and everything that, because people have asked me, and that's great, what do you do all this? And that, what do you put your neck out there?
because it's what's right.
Well, not only is what's right, is because I'm in a better spot today than a lot of the other veterans and everything that we have veterans coming home from a war, being denied benefits that they're so rightfully deserve. The last thing they want to do is be out fighting for their status as well, you
Yeah.
know. So I take it upon myself. I like to shoulder some of that weight so that they
Mhm.
can get in a better place, and maybe one day that someone else will step up and take the reins from me, because I really see this um, outplaying for a long time. Uh, and in a recent letter that Chief Bright sent out, and that was to invite all parties to get together and sign the document so we can get it done. And I was very cautious and everything that at first. Well, people were contacting me, and that's just great news. I said I would only take it with a grain of salt, because there's political motivation behind this. You know,
Absolutely.
um, So I did not comment at the time that, because I know what I know, that veterans will not be getting their status back. And I didn't think it was up to Greg James to tell everyone that that veterans will not be getting their status back. That's up to the chief of Falabu First Nation to tell them that. I wanted respect for our veterans. You know, we're honored by in our cultures at our powwows. You know, I'm saying right now that if you don't want to honor us as a veterans, then stop putting us on display. You know, honor song it's a very sacred song when it comes to veterans. You know.
What did Seamus O'Regan have to say? Did you talk to Seamus O'Regan? Because he was tied up with the Veterans Affairs for a bit.
Yeah, so we did sit down with Seamus, and Seamus said, "Yeah, okay," because he has a brother in the military as well, a naval officer, and he's seen it in black and white. And COVID happened, and powwows were put off for a few years, but when it opened back up, he was at Con River, I believe, went for one of the powwows. We locked on. I locked on to him, and he tried to scurry away, but there wasn't no escaping me at that time. I said, Seamus, what happened? And he said, I have to tell you, it was my best intentions to have your status reinstated. I said, but bureaucrats got a hold to it. That right?
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones, because he said, and I thought he was quite honest at the time when he says, I'm just a politician. Now, you know, once governments move on,
they just told the line.
Right, and the bureaucrats still toe the line. That, you know, I think back to the days I read the book Tommy Prince, one of our most highly decorated war heroes during the Second World War and Korean War, Indigenous veteran that had to come home and get a note from the Indian agent to leave the reserve. Wasn't allowed to own land, did not receive the same benefits, and wasn't allowed to vote. But he spent the rest of his life advocating for other Indigenous people. And I said, well, those days aren't far gone. No longer do we ever get a note from the Indian agent, because the Indian agents are employed in Ottawa in suits and ties. And their sole purpose is to keep that status out of your hand. That is their sole purpose. And people like Fred Caron or whatever, he's a lawyer. Things were going so good one time that for Indigenous people in Newfoundland, that they had to bring them back into the fold to put a wrench into the spokes. You know.
Well, it's all about maintaining control. Like, from what I've seen across all the other different industries and stuff, it appears to be that people get positioned in places where they can leverage them. Is there some type of accountability board for the funding that comes from the government, or how does that work? Like with the First Nations monetary sponsorship, like, is there somebody that's accountable for that? Because typically when something like that's going on, right, when something like that's going on and people are being pushed out, they're usually being pushed out because there's usually something to hide.
You know what? How I view it, Dana, and that is, it is a form of vote buying. You know, everyone wants their jams. You know, so there is no accountability. And when I spoke to Ms. Hutchings on some of the fraud that was taking place in some of the bans and everything, that for a federal politician to turn her back on it and call it Indigenous money doesn't give the right to people. Doesn't give people the right to skim off the top. You know, but that's what they're doing, and there's no accountability. I even went to the police one time, and I even told them that, because I had some information sent to me on a particular person who was committing some of this stuff. And the police go to me, yeah, okay, yeah, I can see it right there in black and white. But you know what? We're not going to do anything about it anymore, because these are times of reconciliation. These are times of we don't want to be see the bad guys anymore. Right? So they're turning a blind eye. And when you do that, they're sending a very clear message that it is open season. Take what you want. Go as deep as you want.
Unless you're Jody Red Bull.
Right.
Right?
You know,
Yeah.
I was, well, I'm returning from St. John's, but one of my things when I was in St. John's, I went to the rooms and to look into the archives. And one of the things I've been very interested in, it was in the terms of union when we joined Confederation in 1949. Um, there was, we know there was 3 documents in the terms of union right now. There was 2 prior who had Indigenous people or the savages included into those documents, but the government in Canada wasn't willing to take on responsibility. And Joey said at the time, Joey Smallwood said, well, you know what? We can't do that because we can't afford it. But there's another aspect as to it as well. In 1949, Indigenous people weren't allowed to vote. So
What?
you weren't allowed to vote until 1962, I think. Don't quote me on that. Around there, you know, Indigenous people weren't even classified as being human beings at that time. So Joey needed that vote because things were so tight, and he was right because we came in under 52% for Confederation. If we took that Indian vote out, that right, we could have lost. He could have lost Confederation. We could still be a British colony,
Or
whatever, that,
American.
or
Yeah.
American colony, that right. But we know during census that were prior to 1949 and 1929 that people were identified as being, we didn't call them Indian, that they were known as savages or whatever, that right.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden, during the terms of union, Indigenous people in Newfoundland dropped off the map. Then in 1952, I think it was, negotiations restarted with Indigenous people again. So they just showed up again,
Disappear and reappear, much like your status,
right.
when it's convenient.
I have asked the Premier's office for an apology because what I see as an identity genocide that happened here in Newfoundland, it wasn't our fault. It really wasn't.
No.
You're told you're being suppressed, you're being oppressed by a government and a system that says that there is no Indigenous people, and people buy into it. And people buy into that narrative that where Mi'kmaq people were brought here by the French to hunt off the Beothuk. It's further from the truth now. Now we know the books are written by the victors, by the colonialism now. But when the books are being written this time, I always tell people this: that which side do you want to be remembered for? Do you want to be seen as being, oppressing your own people? Because we're in court, we spent a lot of money getting to as far as we got, but again, we can spend all the money that we want. There is no accountability within the government of Canada, within the
Not at
Liberal
all.
government. They're not holding
Not at
anyone to
all.
account. Now, laws are being broken.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just turning their back and saying, have at her. And I think it's setting us up for disaster now, because we have people, the hate speech that's out there right now on social media against Newfoundland Indigenous people, and that it's terrifying. We have a right here in Newfoundland as well, to be recognized as Indigenous people as well, just like anyone else. I've spent my time in Montreal, and I spent a lot of time in Oka. And, where I would say, to my friend, I have a very good friend in Oka, he would invite me to these different things and that. And I said, oh, I don't know. I said, I won't be able to attend. He said, why not? I said, well, I don't look Indigenous. He said, what's that supposed to mean?
How do you look Indigenous? Yeah.
So, right, how do you look Indigenous? Because when you would take me, he said, have a look around. What do you see? I see big ones, white ones, brown ones, thin ones, tall ones, short ones. Everyone's the big package there and that, right? So that stereotype, that cookie cutter thing that we have to fit in, you have to be fit in within this narrative,
this little box, the ticky
right,
tacky boxes. Yeah.
that
Now,
we're being taught.
have you had any engagings with police enforcement over this stuff? Like, has the police been mobilized against you for your advocacy? Because I know
I,
that anybody that stands up for anything that's anti-government has a tendency to find some trouble somewhere.
yeah, absolutely not. And every time that I show up at a meeting, just to carry my sign outside, and like I said, it's in mutual respect to people and that. But I wanted to enter the meeting one time just to have 5 minutes off the council time, where I was physically pushed out the door by the chief of Halibu First Nations, yelling at me that I don't belong, Greg. You don't belong here, Greg. And I said, I'm coming in, that right, to have time. That she said, I'll call the cops. She said, frigate, I'm going to call the cops. So anytime I park down there, um, you know, they immediately call the police. And, they come down and the police come down. They should start bringing me coffee, actually, because I can't get one out of the Halibu building. And some of those donuts look really well, too.
So
But
would it be something that your brother could attend? Like, because he's
yes,
acknowledged.
yeah, absolutely. My brothers could attend this. They have supported me in my efforts. They have attended rallies, to support me. But there has to be a will within Halibu First Nation. Uh, I don't like to bring people to embarrassment, but right now I think that a lot of people that are promoting a lot of this now should hang their head in shame.
Like
You
who?
know, I don't know why I thought about this. I thought about this now. Why would I want to be a part of something that does not accept others?
Hmm.
Um, I'm to the point where I just, when my children lost their status and everything, I said, don't worry about it. Dad's going to get it back. I promise. I promise. And it's a promise that I intend on keeping, to my children. And I don't want to break that.
Have you what litigation have you started? Have you put in a lawsuit? Have you?
Well, we've have a group that's called Friends of Halibu, and they're the leading ones who raises the money. We have lawyers in the court, and here's the thing: that you're sitting in the court. We have one lawyer, and then you have the Federation of Newfoundland Indians that's being paid by the federal government.
Hmm.
Then you
So
have
they're
an
not going to
Halibu
do
First
anything.
Nation lawyer that's being paid by the federal government. Then you have two lawyers sitting behind them that are the federal government lawyers who don't say a thing. It's like they're come to watch a ball game. They should bring popcorn sometimes, you know?
Yeah, they're just making sure that the people that they put in place are doing their jobs.
Right. And the federal government is paying these people, rich people, a lot of money to give us a lot of heartache. We're not asking for anything out of the ordinary. We're not asking for to be treated any differently than anyone else within Halibu First Nation. Nah, I think it is my right to my children's right, just like the chief of Halibu First Nations children. I want them to have the same opportunities as anyone else who holds status within Halibu First Nation. And I've been blackballed for that, for wanting fairness.
Yeah, because you don't fall into, you're a nonconformist. So chances are, if you get too close to anything, you're going to want to fix it,
Right.
right? I have
You
the same
know,
problem. I have the exact same problem with anything in relation to the government. As soon as you get close to something or figuring something out, they find a way to be able to push you back further. That's crazy. So, in order for you, in order for you to get your status back, like, you have to geographically live in Newfoundland. You couldn't have served in the military. You can be born in the same from the same mother, same father as your brother and sisters or siblings, and you're not given your status not because it's not your birthright, but because the government doesn't want to give it to you because you gave up your whole life for the country. That's basically What
Exactly,
happened?
and I would tell the chiefs all across Canada and everything that you need to watch this. They base it on the Pally case or a Pauli case and that, because if they can do it to us, they can come for you as well. So, but we haven't had that support. Things have went wrong there now. So once we do gather that support or whatever, then things would change. Things would change. I have had a young man who said to me, I said, I want to join the military. I said, okay, that's great, a great career. He said, but would I lose my status? I said, that
Yes.
I can't answer you because they took it from me when I was in the military. So I can't guarantee you that they're not going to take it from you. If there's another Ponzi scheme that comes up and says that, oh, we now we want to get it down to 10,000 and we have 24,000. Now let's see if we can get that down to 10.
Hmm.
Because, you know, the federal government, the Indians are a responsibility of the federal government, where you look at it when it comes to funding and things like that, I've asked the provincial government to step in. They won't touch it with a 10-foot pole, you know, although they have a direct impact on what happened. They have a direct influence on what happened. I have spoken to Lisa Dempster, and really called her out on it.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't they turn around and the status people in our band would say, "Oh, come on over here. You're one of us." That's wrong. You're not one of us. A politician, Lisa Dempster or Scott Reed, will never be one of us. You know, when I
Right.
asked Mr. Reed for our apology, that right for the identity genocide that has took place in Newfoundland, that he said it's a different government. No, it's not. You're still serving under the Liberal banner,
Mm-hmm.
right? We get apologies all the time for the wrongs that have been done, whether it be a residential school survivors or a 60 scoop. Those apologies been given, whether they ever followed through on, but
Very late.
right. And so it still doesn't give them the right to free themselves from what have taken place. As Indigenous veterans, I thought it was very proud that where they would bring us out and during Indigenous Peoples Day or whatever, and that we'll have a photo op and do a ceremony, and when it's all done, they'll say, "Okay, shut it down, and let's do it again next year," type thing. That right?
It's
I've,
all for
I've seen
media.
it's all for media.
Yeah.
It's all for this and that. But I have said to Miss Hutchings and everything that if you really wanted me to have my status back, it would have happened 9 years ago.
Yeah.
That
Of
my
course.
family would
Get
have
a
been
fought for
reinstated
it.
9 years ago. That um, why 800? We had 10,500 people taken off the Indian registry that lost their status,
How do you
and
lose your status? Because, like, okay,
because they didn't have enough points, they weren't taking the picture off bury picking or whatever in that, right? They didn't have a picture of the chief, so they couldn't get the 13 points, or they didn't have a phone bill that was in their mom's name when they were living in Ontario, let's say, you know. So some people off island did retain their status. How they did it, I don't know. We, there was such there was a such uh, so many applications coming in that we had college students that were hired on a summer program opening up these envelopes, my applications,
mhm.
and they would check it and say, well, if you don't have a proper birth certificate, you're gone. Isn't that right? So yeah,
um,
it's
Greg, so I have friends that are First Nations all across the country, different clan mothers and things like that. Do you think it'd be of any benefit if I kind of gave you some networking capabilities to see what they've got going on?
Well,
Or do
absolutely.
you think it's isolated to Newfoundland?
Well, this is the reason I'm here this evening. That is to get the word out and tell other First Nations across Turtle Island that that has happened to me, and that has happened to 10,500 of our own people. It can happen to you. What are you going to do now? We all need to be in this together. Now, because when you set a precedence for it's been my experience when the government sets the precedence, they want to act upon it. Isn't that
Mm-hmm.
right? When you give them the opportunity to, they'll act upon it. And they're just eyeballing the Métis have a vested interest in this case. Isn't that
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the government has already set a precedent with Elaboo First Nation. Now we have over, well, I think the last estimate was, I don't know, nearly a couple thousand Métis, isn't that right? That the Supreme Court has already said that the Métis are responsibility of the federal government. How the government's going to enact that? Well, they're going to want to weed people out. That's for one thing,
Yep.
right? So those people that serving in the military and things like that, I would say pay attention because it's coming, that right? And people may say, well, you're just fear mongering. Why would I be fear mongering if it was an actual thing that happened? It's happened to me. It's happened to my
Yeah.
family. It's happened to 10,500 people, families. What we
Well,
can't figure out,
if it doesn't affect them though, with all things, if unless it touches people personally, they generally try to play a blind eye, right? And then the alternative is they figure if they're going to be supportive or kick up grief for these guys, that it might affect their status too,
right?
right?
And that's I'm not only out there fighting for Greg James's status or the 800 veterans who lost their status. I'm out there fighting for the 10,500 that lost their status, and their families and every other First Nation person across Turtle Island. And I've heard so many stories, people when they were granted status and everything. A lot of people dropped their insurance because they have non-insurable health benefits now. So
Yep,
why
they didn't
pay
need it.
for something and they're getting non-insurable health benefits now? I had this lady come up to me and that she was crying. She's severe diabetic. That she said, my insurance company won't take me back anymore. They won't have me back, and I don't have my status anymore. How do I pay for my diabetic medication now? I don't know, but I know I'll try to give you a voice.
Yeah.
I'll do my best. And that there's so many stories of another people their sons and daughters are living in addictions. Isn't that
Mm-hmm.
right? That card does come down to life or death. Now, because if you had a First Nations card, status card, you'd be flying off this island to one of the best treatment centers that money can buy.
Yep.
That right? Because you don't, you have to stand in line and wait like everyone else, and not get those services off island. Addiction services is something that's rampant that through our First Nations. So we need to look at that and fear is fear. Fear.
Well, if they're
I
gonna do it for First Nations, if these are perks, you know what I mean, to being part of the original tribe in Newfoundland, then that should be straight across the board, and it should never be politicized. It should be about your birthright. You know,
right,
like the fact that people argue over what pictures that you have available. Like I could probably get a picture with a police chief or a First Nations chief and go berry picking, right? That's not how it
right.
works.
Not everyone is comfortable in exposing their indigeneity or whatever. Now, it makes people feel uncomfortable. But people have asked me, Dan, and that they said, Greg, what do you want to be recognized as being Indigenous? Well, I say not because the government of Canada says I can. Not
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
And I
Yep.
jumped through it. I jumped through all their hoops. I passed their smell tests and everything. That then they turn around at the end of the day and that go and say, still not good enough. It's still not good enough. Although the rules are there to follow, and we've done
Well,
that.
It's protecting history and cultural preservation. Like straight across the board with this liberal government we have, like we're losing all of our cultures. You know,
Oh,
we can't. I don't know. I totally believe in diversity, right? But I also believe in heritage and culture. At some point in time, there has to be some form of preservation for our old ways, right? And to recognize where we came from and what drives and what people are responsible for that. For me, from the outside looking in, that's what my interest is. You
right.
know, we've already lost so much in our in Newfoundland, you know,
Yeah,
in general, with the amount of mass immigration and all of these things that are happening, like with our fisheries, we can't go fishing anymore like normal. You know, or it's all going to offshore. So we're getting
unless
to
you
such
work on a
a market.
foreign factory trawler, that you can get all the fish that you want. Uh,
Exactly.
but I've is it going to stop me because I don't have a status card or whatever? Now, is it going to stop me from teaching? Uh, passing on what I have known, what my father has given me, or whatnot. No, it's not. So people say, "What do you want? What do you want to do with it?" And everything. That I want to be treated equally. I want to be treated equally, just like my brother or sister, or just like the other person who went through the same process.
And
So
how confusing for your children. Okay, first, okay, you're First Nations, and then no, we're not. You know, like
I,
how does
I,
that work? And
I
their
think
cousins, their first cousins are acknowledged, and they're not. What kind of a message does it send to your children, who is the next generation, about this government? It's like, I can identify or I can't identify as.
and yeah, because my son was 9 years old when he lost his status and everything that, and I've asked him that, and I probably should have done a better job protecting the narrative around it or whatever and that, but I was upset and I didn't, and so I asked him if he was going to a ceremony with me one evening or whatever to the Swit Lodge, and he said no, they don't want me.
Oh,
So
that's wrong.
that's it is wrong, and
It
it
is
teaches her.
wrong. Yeah,
It teaches people not to separate people as well. Isn't that right?
yeah. It doesn't promote unity. I mean, the whole point of culture is that we celebrate. Like if you go to places like in Edmonton, I lived in Edmonton for 20 years. They had heritage days, right? So over here you'd have Jamaicans cooking their favorite meals. Over here you had the,
Yeah.
Israelis. There was people from everywhere. Cultural diversity is meant to be celebrated. And there's nothing wrong. It doesn't create division. It creates strength in unity, and it preserves life. It really bothers me that this current government is stumping the shit out of anything that makes sense. You know, like how can you say that we're about retribution, right? When when this is happening
Right.
to the Halibut.
I was Miss Petitpas was in the Corner Brook Legion branch 13 there some time ago, maybe 6 months ago, or maybe I don't know. Anyway, she come down for a photo op, and what she got was an earful from me
Mhm.
because I told her, said, I don't like how you're treating Indigenous veterans here on island of Newfoundland. And she said, what do you mean? So I told her that, and she was absolutely blown away by it, that Indigenous veterans would be being treated. And here she is in charge of a department, letting it happen and under her nose and under her watch. So
I
she did
didn't even
grant me.
know.
She granted me a meeting, and I sat there with maybe 8 or 9 of them around the table, of her aides and her secretaries, and you know, they said we're going on a fact finding mission. We'll get back to you. To date, I haven't heard anything. So I put calls into the new minister, put an email into the new minister, and still I haven't gotten a call back. Only recently did the AFN and the and Veterans Affairs sit down and sign a memorandum of understanding and mutual respect.
Hmm.
Where's our respect? Where's ours?
Yeah.
Where's the respect for those 800 veterans that lost their status? No.
Where's the status for the 800 people that put their life on the line for our country? You
You
know,
know,
poor veterans have had a really rough go with the maid. You know what I mean? With the fact that they don't get the support they need. Like everybody in this country owes our lives to the men and women that stand up for our
I,
freedoms.
I'm sorry, it's getting. Oh, so, okay, I got a light. Oh, all right, there it
There you
is.
go. Yay, I can see you again.
Yeah, I was
So,
getting.
so
Um,
Greg, if we got about 5 minutes left, what do you want? What do you want to be the product of this conversation today? What is it that Canada and Newfoundland and Labrador could do for you? How can they find you? How can they reach you? And how can they support you?
the government of Canada knows where I live. They know my phone number. They know my email. They can reach out. I want open dialogue. I want to get the word out. It's about opening up, doors of mutual respect as well. And that, I'm not there to rag on them. We can fix. There's a solution here. Let's find that solution together. You know, but doing it the way that the government of Canada is doing it right now shows no respect. It's just humiliating, actually, and that to be going through this process, this whole thing. So I want to get the word out there to people all across Canada, all across the Turtle Island, that if it can happen to me, it can happen to you. So stand together and let's demand that we be stood up and heard when it comes to having our politicians accountable to the people of this country. And would I do it again? Of course, I would serve my country again. Absolutely, with a lot of pride. I think about it every day, actually. So, but would I let them do what they done to me this time around? Absolutely not. You
No.
know, so it's just not about protecting my own rights or whatever and that. But I'm not just fighting for myself and my family. Now I fight for everyone. Uh, and people have said to me, "Oh, who are Indigenous veterans more than anyone else?" Well, they're not actually, but we are asserted certain rights for the service that we have done to our country, and that
Absolutely.
and those rights should be respected.
So, how do they find you? If somebody wanted to reach out to you that's watching this broadcast, how do they find you? Do you have an email that they could access or
I do
Facebook
run a large
profile?
group on social media, Facebook. It's called Damaguk, and it is about 12,500 of like-minded people are in there. My email address is it's a good Newfoundland email address. Is porkscraps. That's PORKSCRAPS @hotmail.com. Or you can reach out to me by phone at 902-220-4734. And yes, I do have Facebook under Greg Janes. So look me up and let's have a discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Greg. I really appreciate you giving us your time today. I find it very fascinating that just with the veteran situation across the country, in regards to what you've got going on with your status, with what we've got going on with, the things that have been stripped away from our military, the fact that the immigration people are getting treated better as foreigners in our country than our military, all of these things. It's an atrocity. And I don't think people are seeing enough information online for them to have an understanding of what's really happening. So let's hope that there's people out there that give a shit.
Right.
Right?
And you know what I say, Dana, is that our government of Canada asks us to fight for them. And the last thing we should have to do is fight our government.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Greg. I'm here anytime if you want to come back on and have a chat, or if there's any new developments, please don't hesitate to let us know.
You haven't heard from me or the last anyway. So
Definitely not.
thank you for giving me the platform. It's been
Thank you.
enjoyable.
Thank you
Great.
so much, Greg. Take care. Bye.